I want to tell you something I've never told anyone outside of a courtroom. 3 months ago, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my grandfather's study, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of old paper and cedar, and I found a USB drive taped to the underside of his desk drawer with a strip of masking tape that had my name written on it in his handwriting. Not the shaky handwriting from his last few years. The handwriting from when I was a little girl, the same handwriting that used to sign birthday cards and leave notes in my lunchbox when I stayed with him on weekends. Strong, deliberate, certain. I knew before I plugged it into my laptop that whatever was on it would change everything. I just didn't know it would change everything for everyone. Let me go back. My mother died when I was 7 years old. Ovarian cancer. Fast and without much warning. I have a few clear memories of her, the way she smelled like lavender hand lotion. The sound of her laugh when something genuinely surprised her. The specific softness of her cardigan sleeves when she hugged me. And then she was gone. And it was just my father and me in a house that was suddenly much too quiet. For about 2 years, it was okay. My father grieved. I grieved. And we figured out how to live around the shape of what we'd lost. My grandfather, my father's dad, stepped in during that time in ways I will never forget. He drove me to school 3 days a week. He taught me to make his mother's biscuit recipe on Sunday mornings. When I cried because I missed my mom, he didn't tell me to stop or change the subject. He just sat with me and let me cry. And sometimes he cried too. Then my father met her. My stepmother came into our lives when I was 9, and she married my father 11 months later. She was beautiful and well-dressed and spoke in a very precise, controlled way that I now recognize as the voice of someone who has rehearsed being liked. She brought 2 small dogs and an opinion about everything. She told my father I needed more structure. She told me, sweetly, that she hoped we could be close. We were never close. My half-brother Ryan was born when I was 11. And from that moment forward, the dynamic in my house shifted into something I didn't have vocabulary for at the time, but can now describe very clearly. I was the before, and Ryan was the after. I was the remnant of a life my father used to have. Ryan was the life he had chosen. I want to be fair here, because this story isn't about hating my father. He wasn't cruel. He was just absent in the specific way that men sometimes become absent when they have a new family and find it easier to not notice the problem than to address it. He came to my school plays. He signed my report cards. He showed up in the technical ways while missing everything underneath. My stepmother was more intentional about it. She never screamed at me or called me names. She was far too smart for that. Instead, she questioned everything quietly. My grades were good but not exceptional, were they? My friends were nice but a little ordinary. When I decided to become a nurse, she asked my father within my earshot, and I believe deliberately so, whether that was really making the most of my potential, given that there were so many more prestigious paths in medicine. When I graduated from nursing school, she sent me a card that said, "Congratulations on your achievement," in the kind of neutral tone that made the word achievement feel like a small, forgettable thing. Ryan, meanwhile, was gifted. Genuinely. Not just in the way parents say their children are gifted. He was sharp and competitive, and my stepmother made sure everyone knew it. By the time he was in high school, every family gathering had a section devoted to Ryan's accomplishments, his debate trophies, his early acceptance letters, his internship prospects. I learned to smile through those conversations and excuse myself to help in the kitchen. The only person who never participated in that performance was my grandfather. He called me every Sunday. He asked about my patients, not as a category, but specifically. "How's the little boy you mentioned last week? The one with the respiratory thing?" He came to my apartment for dinner and ate everything I cooked and told me I had a gift for it. When I told him that my stepmother had suggested, again, that I consider going back to school for something more lucrative, he was quiet for a moment and then said, very carefully, "Claire, I want you to know that taking care of people the way you do is not a small thing. Don't let anyone make it small." I held on to that for years. When my grandfather was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 18 months before he died, my stepmother became very involved in his care. I want to say that generously. She organized his medications, managed his appointments, hired the home care aide. She also, I later learned, became very involved in his finances. At the time, I noticed nothing, or very little. I noticed that my grandfather seemed quieter on our Sunday calls. I noticed that when I asked about his will once, not because I wanted anything, but because I was worried about him and wanted to make sure everything was in order, he said something that didn't quite connect. "It's being taken care of. Don't worry, sweetheart. It's all being taken care of." I asked by whom. He said my stepmother was helping him with the paperwork. I felt a small, cold unease that I pushed down. He died on a Thursday morning in October. I was at the hospital finishing a 12-hour shift when my father called. I drove to the house in my scrubs and I stood in the hallway of the home where my grandfather had lived for 40 years, and I felt the loss of him somewhere deep and physical, the way you feel a door close in a large empty building. The will reading was 3 weeks later. I had expected to be left something small and meaningful, maybe his mother's china, maybe some of the old photographs from the study, maybe a piece of his watch collection. I was not prepared for what actually happened. The attorney read the document, and according to it, my grandfather had updated his will 8 months before his death. In the revised version, the majority of his estate, the house, the investment accounts, a life insurance policy, had been redirected into a family trust managed jointly by my father and my stepmother, with Ryan named as the primary beneficiary upon their deaths. I received a single-line item, a set of first edition books from his library, valued by the estate at approximately $1,200. I remember staring at the attorney's desk and thinking, very clearly, this doesn't sound like him. And then I thought about my stepmother managing his paperwork. And then I thought about how quiet he had gotten on our Sunday calls. I didn't say anything. I took the books. I drove home and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 45 minutes before I went inside. For 2 months, I told myself I was being unfair. People change their wills. Old men with dementia make decisions their families don't expect. It wasn't necessarily what it looked like. I didn't want to be the kind of person who contested a will out of greed. But I couldn't let go of one thing. My grandfather had always told me, from the time I was old enough to understand, that when he died, the house would come to me. Not because of the money, but because he knew how much it meant to me. He had sat with me on that porch hundreds of times. He had told me stories about my mother in that house that I couldn't get anywhere else. He had said, more than once, "This house is yours someday, Claire. I want you to have it." And now it wasn't mine. The task of going through his belongings fell largely to me because my father's back was bad that winter and my stepmother had already arranged for an estate sale company to come in 6 weeks out. I went on weekends, and I packed things carefully, and I tried to feel close to him by being in the spaces where he had lived. The study was the last room I tackled. It was where he spent most of his time reading, writing letters, doing the crossword puzzle at his desk every morning. I saved it for last because I knew it would be the hardest. I was emptying the bottom desk drawer, old tax documents, expired insurance cards, a rubber-banded stack of birthday cards going back decades when I felt the drawer catch slightly as I pulled it all the way out. I looked underneath. The USB drive was taped to the bottom panel, near the back. Small, black, unremarkable. And on the masking tape, in his handwriting from years ago, my name, Claire. I sat with it in my hands for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, came back, opened my laptop, and plugged it in. There was one file. A video. 43 minutes long. The file name was just today's date, the date he had recorded it, which was 14 months before he died, 2 months before his dementia had progressed to the point where our phone calls began to change. I pressed play. He was sitting at his desk, this desk, the one I was sitting at right now, and he looked like himself. Sharp and clear-eyed in the way he used to be before the illness took hold. He was wearing the blue sweater I had given him for his birthday 3 years ago. He looked directly into the camera for a moment before he started talking, and there was something in his expression that I can only describe as determination. "Claire," he said, "if you're watching this, then I'm gone, and I want you to know that I left this for you because I trust you, and because I have spent the last several months watching something happen that I am not able to stop on my own. So I'm asking you to stop it for me." I put my coffee cup down. He explained everything, slowly, methodically, the way he always did when something mattered to him. He told me that 8 months ago, my stepmother had approached him about updating his estate plan. She had told him it was for tax purposes, for simplicity, to make sure everything transferred smoothly. He said he had been tired and he had trusted her and he had signed documents that he later, when he had a few clear days in a row, began to realize he had not fully read. He had then asked his attorney, privately, for a copy of the updated will. When he read it, he understood what had happened. He said he wanted to contest it himself, but that by the time he understood the full extent of what had been done, his cognitive decline had accelerated enough that he feared it would be easy to dismiss him. He was not willing to spend his last months in a legal battle that would cost everyone pain and might not be won. But he was also not willing to leave me with nothing and pretend it was fair. So he did something instead. He recorded this video while he was still clear. And then he contacted his original attorney, not the one my stepmother had steered him toward for the revision, but the attorney who had drafted his will 15 years ago, a woman named Patricia who had retired upstate and who agreed, as a personal favor, to hold a sealed envelope for him. He told me her full name, her current address, her phone number, which he read out slowly and then repeated. The sealed envelope, he explained, contained a signed and notarized statement of his original intentions for the estate, a medical evaluation from his own physician confirming his capacity at the time of signing, and documentation account statements, correspondence showing that the revision had been initiated and guided by my stepmother during a period when he was not receiving independent legal counsel. He paused on camera and looked down at his hands for a moment. When he looked back up, his voice was different, not legal. "I want to tell you something that isn't about the money," he said. "I want to tell you that I have watched you grow up with a lot of grace under circumstances that required more grace than anyone should have to use. I watched your father choose a version of his life that left less room for you, and I watched you adapt to that without bitterness, and I have always been so proud of you for it. Being a nurse the way you are, one staying late, remembering names, treating your patients like they are worth knowing, that is not a small thing. That is the thing that matters. I need you to hear me say that while I can still say it clearly." He talked for another 20 minutes after that about the house, about his wishes, about what he hoped I would do and not do. He asked me not to pursue anything out of anger, but to pursue it out of the belief that his real intentions deserved to be honored. He told me he had always wanted me to have the house, and that this was still true. He said he loved me. At the end, he said, "The tape under the drawer will have held for years if I put it on right. I was always good at that kind of thing." And then, very quietly, he smiled, and the recording ended. I called Patricia the following morning. She remembered me immediately. She told me she had been waiting for my call and that she had kept the envelope exactly as my grandfather asked. She was gentle and clear and professional, and she told me what the process would look like if I wanted to move forward. I called an attorney of my own that afternoon. I won't walk through every detail of what followed, because honestly some of it was complicated and tedious and involved a great deal of paperwork. But I will tell you the important parts. My stepmother had, in fact, guided my grandfather to a different attorney for the revision one she had selected, whose office she had driven him to, during a period when my grandfather was not accompanied by anyone else. His own physician, when contacted, confirmed that his cognitive state during that window was variable and that he would not have been considered to have reliable capacity for complex financial decisions without independent evaluation and counsel. My stepmother had not arranged for that evaluation. The original attorney had a signed document affirming my grandfather's wishes from 14 months before his death, recorded when he was medically confirmed to be competent. The estate attorney my father and stepmother used tried, for about 6 weeks, to argue that the revised will should stand. Their argument was not strong. My grandfather's video, articulate, detailed, dated, and clearly recorded by a man in possession of his full faculties, was difficult to dismiss. His original attorney's documentation was difficult to dismiss. His physician's assessment was difficult to dismiss. My father called me twice during that period. The first call was tense, and mostly involved him asking whether I was sure I wanted to do this, whether I understood how hard this would be on the family, whether I had really thought about what I was asking. I told him I had thought about it for years, in every sense of the word. I believed him. in the limited way that I believe people who are sorry about consequences rather than actions. I told him I accepted that, and I meant it, and I moved on. My stepmother never called. The estate was redistributed according to my grandfather's original intentions. I received the house, which I have been slowly, carefully renovating over the past few months. The investment accounts were divided in the manner he had originally specified. Ryan received what my grandfather had always intended for him. Not nothing, but not everything, and designated in a way that was fair. I moved into the house in February. The study is still the room I go to in the mornings. I kept his desk exactly where it was. I make coffee in the kitchen where he taught me his mother's biscuit recipe, and some Sundays I make those biscuits and eat them standing at the counter and feel him there, not in a frightening way, but in the way that people who have loved you completely do not entirely leave. I think about what he said in the video about grace, about what matters, about my patience. I work the night shift 3 days a week now, and I still stay late sometimes, and I still remember names. Not because it was acknowledged, but because it was never about being acknowledged. It was always just about the work itself. He understood that about me better than almost anyone. There is something else I want to say, because I think it's the most important part of this story. My grandfather could not stop what was happening to him. He was an old man with a diagnosis that was taking pieces of him one by one, and the people he had trusted were rewriting his story without his permission. Most people in that situation have no recourse. They don't have the foresight or the energy or the remaining clarity to do what he did, to find a quiet afternoon, sit down in front of a laptop, and speak directly to the person who needed to hear it most. He used one of his last clear windows to make sure I knew the truth. I think about that whenever I feel impatient, or whenever I'm tired, or whenever someone makes me feel like what I do doesn't add up to much. Someone who knew me completely decided, in one of his final acts of intention, that I was worth the effort of being protected. That I was worth a 43-minute video and a strip of masking tape and a sealed envelope kept by a retired attorney upstate. I don't need anything else to tell me I was loved. I have the evidence. I have the house where I grew up, learning what love looked like. I have the desk where he left my name in handwriting that never shook. And I have 43 minutes of him, clear-eyed and wearing the blue sweater, looking into a camera and saying everything he needed to say while he still could. It was enough. It was more than enough. If you are watching this wherever you are, whatever brought you here, and you have someone in your life who has been quietly protecting you in ways you can't see yet, I hope you find out someday. And if you have been told, by someone who should have known better, that you are not worth much, that your work is not enough, that the people who were supposed to love you were disappointed in who you turned out to be, I want you to know that the people who say those things are not the authority. They have never been the authority. Sometimes the truth is hidden in a drawer, taped there by steady hands, waiting until you are ready to find it. You will find it,